bring me someone smarter. Now. The words didn't just echo. They cut through the room like a verdict already decided. Glasses stopped midair. Conversations dissolved into silence. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed to shrink away, like it knew it didn't belong anymore. Ethan Caldwell stood at the center of it all, one hand pressed against the marble table, the other gripping his phone like it had personally betrayed him. At 42, he had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing but sharp instincts and zero patience for mistakes. And right now, patience was gone. Completely gone. Across from him, 3 executives avoided eye contact, their tailored suits suddenly feeling too tight, their expertise suddenly not enough. A deal worth over $80 million was slipping through their fingers, not because of the market, not because of competition, but because something wasn't adding up. Something small. Something no one could see. Or worse, something no one understood. I said. Ethan repeated, slower this time, colder, bring me someone smarter. Near the edge of the table, unnoticed by most, Clara Whitmore stood with a small leather notepad in her hand. She hadn't moved. Not when the voice rose. Not when the tension cracked the air. Not even when the others stepped back. She simply stood there, still as a quiet thought no one had time to hear. 27 years old. Blonde hair tied back in a simple knot. White shirt, black apron. The kind of person people forgot seconds after placing their order. And yet, her eyes weren't on the room. They were on the screen. Just for a moment. A flicker. As Ethan turned slightly, pacing, his laptop sat open. Numbers, projections, red flags hidden inside columns of confidence. Most would see chaos. She saw a pattern. Or rather, the absence of one. Sir, one of the executives began carefully. We've already run the models 3 times, then run them a 4th. Ethan snapped, not even looking at him. Or don't run them at all. I don't pay for repetition. I pay for results. Silence again. Heavy this time. The kind that settles in your chest and stays there. Clara took a step forward. Small. Measured. Almost invisible. But enough. You're sparkling water, she said softly, placing the glass beside him. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It didn't try to compete. It simply existed. Ethan barely glanced at her. Another waitress. Background noise. Replaceable. Leave it, he muttered, eyes still locked on the screen. She didn't leave. Not yet. Her gaze lingered for just 1 second longer than expected. On the numbers. On the structure. On the flaw. Then she stepped back. Quiet again. Invisible again. But something had shifted. Not in the room. Not yet. Only in her mind. Because while everyone else was trying to fix what was broken, she had already seen the real problem. And it wasn't where they were looking. The numbers did not change, but the room felt heavier with every passing second, as if the air itself was waiting for someone to say something that actually mattered, and yet no one did. Ethan exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried more frustration than fatigue, and leaned closer to the screen, scanning the same rows again, faster this time, as if speed could replace clarity, as if urgency could force the answer to reveal itself. It did not. One of the executives shifted in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks like it might restore his confidence, but his voice, when it came, was thinner than before. We accounted for every variable, sir. Market volatility, currency fluctuation, regulatory delay. It is all there. Ethan did not respond immediately. His eyes narrowed, not at the explanation, but at the pattern behind it. Something was off. Not wrong in an obvious way. Worse, subtly wrong. The kind of mistake that hides in plain sight because it looks correct at first glance. If it is all there, he said quietly, then why does it still feel like we are missing something? No one answered. Because no one knew. At the edge of the room, Clara stood near the service station now, her hands resting lightly against the polished wood, her expression unchanged, but her attention sharper than ever. She replayed the structure in her mind. Not the numbers themselves, but how they connected, how they flowed, how one assumption quietly leaned on another until the entire model stood on something unstable. It was not the data. It was the question behind the data. She stepped forward again, this time not by accident, not by duty, but by choice. Soft steps. Controlled. Intentional. Sir, she said, her voice still calm, still measured, but this time it carried something else. Direction. Ethan did not look up immediately, but there was a pause, a fraction longer than before, just enough to acknowledge that the sound did not belong to the chaos. You should probably let your team handle this. One of the executives added quickly, almost defensively, as if protecting the boundary between authority and interruption. Clara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Ethan. You are solving the wrong problem. The sentence did not rise. It did not demand attention, and yet it landed with a weight that silence could not ignore. Ethan froze. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone, but something in his posture shifted, like a system recalibrating mid-process. Slowly, he looked up. Really looked this time. At her. Not the uniform. Not the role. Her. Excuse me, he said, his tone not angry, not yet, but sharpened by curiosity he did not expect. Clara took one more step closer to the table, just enough to see the screen clearly, just enough to confirm what she already knew. You are trying to fix the outcome, she said, her voice steady, her eyes moving briefly across the data. But the assumption that created the outcome is incorrect. No one spoke. Not the executives. Not the staff. Not even the music dared to return. Ethan's gaze flickered back to the screen, then to her again, as if measuring the distance between arrogance and possibility. And what exactly, he asked slowly, do you think is incorrect? Clara did not answer immediately. She reached out, hesitated for half a second, then gently rotated the laptop a few inches toward herself, not with permission, but without disrespect. Her finger hovered over a single line. This growth projection, she said quietly. It assumes demand reacts to price. But in this segment, it reacts to timing. Another silence. Deeper now. Because this time, it was not empty. It was thinking. The word hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Timing. Not price. Not volume. Not risk. Timing. Ethan's eyes locked onto the line she indicated, and for the first time since the problem began, he stopped scrolling. Completely. His finger lifted from the trackpad. His shoulders stilled. The room followed. One of the executives leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if the answer might suddenly reveal itself now that someone else had pointed in a different direction. That does not make sense, he said quickly, almost too quickly. Demand curves are always tied to price sensitivity. That is basic economics. Clara did not react to him, not even a glance. Her focus remained steady, calm, almost detached. In most markets, she said softly. Yes. She paused just long enough to let the distinction settle. But not in this one. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Not defensive. Not dismissive. Curious. Explain, he said. Just one word. No raised voice. No impatience. Just expectation. Clara nodded slightly, as if the invitation had already been anticipated. Her finger moved down the screen, tracing a quiet path through the model. This segment is not reacting to cost, she continued. It is reacting to access. Another pause. Short. Precise. Your customers are not asking if they can afford it. They are asking when they can get it. A shift. Subtle, but undeniable. The executive who had spoken earlier leaned back this time. Slower, his confidence no longer leading the conversation. That would mean, he began, but did not finish. Clara finished it for him. That your entire projection is delayed, she said. Not inaccurate. Just misaligned. Ethan leaned closer, his eyes scanning the data again, but differently now. Not searching for errors. Searching for confirmation. And there it was. A pattern he had missed. Not because it was hidden, but because he had been looking at it the wrong way. If the demand spike is tied to rollout timing, he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else, then the revenue curve shifts forward. Clara gave a small nod. And the risk window narrows, she added. Silence again. But this time, it felt lighter. Sharper. Like the room had. Exhaled without realizing it had been holding its breath. Ethan straightened slowly, his mind moving faster now, recalculating, restructuring, rebuilding the model in real time. The frustration that had filled his voice minutes ago was gone, replaced by something else. Focus. Run the model again, he said, not looking away from the screen. But shift the demand trigger to the deployment phase, not the pricing phase. No one moved. For half a second. Then suddenly, everything did. Fingers flew across keyboards. Screens refreshed. Numbers adjusted. The system responded. And within seconds, the projection changed. Not slightly. Significantly. The red warnings softened. The inconsistencies aligned. The deal stabilized. Ethan watched the numbers settle into place, his expression unreadable, but his silence louder than any reaction he could have given. Because this time, he was not angry. He was thinking. Slowly, he leaned back, his gaze drifting away from the screen, away from the numbers, and back to her. Clara had already stepped back, not claiming credit, not waiting for recognition, just returning to where she had been. Quiet, composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his mind no longer on the deal, but on the question he had not expected to ask. Not what just happened, but who just did it. "What is your name?" he asked finally, his voice lower now, stripped of everything unnecessary. Clara met his gaze, steady as before. "Clara," she said. Just that. No explanation. No title. Ethan nodded once, slowly, as if committing it to memory. "Clara." Then he glanced at the screen again, at the numbers that now made sense, at the problem that had just disappeared, and something shifted inside him. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently, because he had asked for someone smarter. And for the first time in a long time, he realized he had not been the smartest person in the room. The room did not return to normal right away. It shifted, quietly, subtly, like something invisible had been rearranged and no one quite knew how to stand in it yet. The executives were still working, adjusting projections, confirming the new model, but their movements had changed. Slower, more careful, as if they were now aware that the answer had not come from where they expected. Ethan remained seated, his eyes moving between the screen and the space where Clara had been standing just moments ago. She was no longer near the table. She had returned to the rhythm of the restaurant, moving between guests with the same calm precision, as if solving an 8-figure problem had been no different than refilling a glass of water. That was what unsettled him the most. Not the solution, not even the accuracy, the ease. He stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket, not out of habit this time, but to give himself a second to think. "Continue with the revised model," he said to his team, his voice controlled, steady, but no longer sharp. "I want updated projections within the hour." They nodded quickly, almost in relief, and returned to their screens. Ethan did not stay. He stepped away from the table, his attention no longer anchored to the deal, but to something else entirely. Across the room, Clara placed a plate in front of a couple seated by the window, her posture straight, her movements efficient, her expression neutral but not distant. She listened when they spoke. She nodded. She smiled, briefly. Then she moved on. No hesitation. No glance back toward him, as if he had already become part of the past. Ethan watched her for a moment longer than necessary, then walked toward her, not hurried, not hesitant, but deliberate. When he reached her, she was adjusting silverware at an empty table, aligning each piece with quiet attention to detail. She noticed him before he spoke, not because she looked up, but because her hands paused for a fraction of a second. "Is there something else you need, sir?" she asked, her voice as composed as before. No curiosity, no expectation, just professionalism. Ethan studied her, this time without distraction, without assumption. "You saw it in seconds," he said, his tone lower now, almost reflective. "Something my entire team missed." Clara finished aligning the last fork before she responded. "They were not wrong," she said softly. "They were just focused on the wrong variable." Ethan let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and a realization. "That is a very expensive distinction," he replied. Clara gave a small nod. "It usually is." A brief silence followed, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was measured, intentional. Ethan glanced back toward his table, where his team was still working, then back to her. "Where did you learn to think like that?" he asked. The question was direct, but his tone was not interrogative. It was genuine. Clara picked up a folded napkin, smoothing its edges with careful precision before placing it down. "Observation," she said simply. Ethan frowned slightly. "That is not an answer," he said. Clara looked at him then, fully, calmly. "It is the only one that matters," she replied. He held her gaze for a moment, searching for something more, some hidden explanation, some credential that would make sense of what he had just witnessed. But there was none, or at least, none she was willing to offer. And somehow, that made it more compelling. "Clara," he said again, her name slower this time, more deliberate. "You are working in the wrong place." She did not react immediately. No smile, no surprise, just a quiet stillness, like she had heard something similar before and already decided what it meant. "No," she said gently, returning her attention to the table. I am exactly where I need to be. Ethan did not argue. He did not push. He simply stood there for a moment longer, realizing that for the first time in years, he was not the one controlling the direction of a conversation. And strangely, he did not mind. Clara turned slightly, ready to step away, but Ethan spoke again before the distance could settle between them. You solved it too fast, he said, his voice quieter now, not accusing, but searching. That was not luck. Clara paused, her hand resting lightly against the back of the chair she had just aligned. She did not turn immediately. When she did, her expression remained composed, but there was something more deliberate in her gaze now, as if she was deciding how much of herself to reveal and how much to keep untouched. It was not complicated, she replied. Ethan let out a small breath through his nose, almost amused, but not quite. It was complicated enough that 3 analysts and a senior partner missed it, he said. So either they are not as good as I thought, or you are not who you appear to be. Clara held his gaze for a moment, then lowered it slightly, not out of submission, but consideration. People usually see what they expect to see, she said softly. It makes everything simpler. Ethan studied her, the words settling deeper than he expected. Around them, the restaurant had returned to its rhythm. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. Orders were called and delivered. But the space between them remained still, separate from the noise, like a quiet room inside a louder one. What did you expect to see? Ethan asked. Clara allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile. Not warm, not distant, just knowing. A man who does not like being wrong, she said. Ethan did not deny it. He did not laugh it off either. Instead, he nodded once, slowly, accepting the truth without defense. That is accurate, he said. Another pause. Short, but meaningful. And what do you see now, he asked. Clara's eyes lifted back to his, steady as ever. Someone who noticed when it mattered, she answered. The simplicity of it caught him off guard. No flattery, no exaggeration, just a quiet acknowledgement. And somehow, that felt more valuable than praise. Across the room, one of his executives approached, tablet in hand, hesitation clear in every step. Sir, he said carefully, the updated projections are stabilizing. If we proceed with the adjusted timeline, the deal holds. We might even gain a margin advantage. Ethan nodded without looking away from Clara. Good, he said. Move forward. The executive lingered for a moment, his eyes briefly flickering toward Clara, then back to Ethan, as if trying to understand what had just happened, then quietly returned to the table. Ethan finally shifted his attention, just for a second, confirming the numbers on the tablet, then handed it back without comment. When he looked at Clara again, something had changed. Not in her. In him. The urgency was gone. The frustration had dissolved. What remained was clarity and curiosity. Finish your shift, he said, his tone measured, but firm in a different way than before. Clara blinked once, not confused, but acknowledging the shift in direction. I intend to, she replied calmly. Ethan gave a slight nod. Good, he said. Then, after a brief pause, because I would like to continue this conversation. Clara tilted her head slightly, studying him, weighing the words not for what they said, but for what they implied. Conversations usually require 2 willing participants, she said. Ethan allowed a faint smile this time, subtle but real. Then I will make sure I am worth the time, he replied. Clara did not answer right away. She picked up her notepad again, the familiar object grounding the moment back into something ordinary. But before she turned away, she met his gaze one more time, just long enough to leave something unspoken hanging between them. Not agreement, not refusal, just possibility. Then she stepped past him, moving back into the flow of the room, leaving Ethan standing there, not with control, not with certainty, but with something far more unfamiliar. Interest. The evening moved forward, but Ethan no longer experienced it the same way. Conversations continued around him, deals were discussed, numbers confirmed, glasses refilled, but his attention kept drifting back to a single detail that refused to leave his mind. Not the solution itself, not even the precision of it. The restraint. Clara had not tried to prove anything. She had not asked to be heard. She had simply seen what others missed and spoken only when it mattered. That was rare. At his table, the executives were finishing their revised projections, their voices lower now, more measured, as if the earlier tension had reshaped their confidence. One of them glanced up at Ethan. "We are ready to finalize, sir," he said. Ethan nodded once, his response automatic, but his focus still elsewhere. "Proceed," he said. The deal, which had nearly collapsed less than an hour ago, now stood stable, even promising. On paper, it was a success. But Ethan did not feel victorious. He felt recalibrated, as if something subtle but fundamental had shifted in how he evaluated people, problems, even himself. Across the room, Clara moved with the same quiet efficiency, carrying a tray, setting down plates, listening, responding, then moving on. No hesitation. No sign that anything unusual had happened. And yet, Ethan noticed something he had not seen before. The way she observed before she acted. The way her eyes paused for a fraction longer on details others ignored. The way she never rushed, even when everything around her did. It was not just intelligence. It was discipline, a kind that could not be taught in a boardroom. When her shift finally slowed, the restaurant began to thin out, the late evening crowd replacing the earlier rush. Softer voices, longer conversations, less urgency. Clara stepped behind the service counter, setting down her notepad, taking a brief moment to rest her hands against the surface. Not tired, just still. Ethan approached again, this time without the weight of urgency, without the sharp edge he carried before. Just intention. "You were right," he said, stopping a few feet from her. Clara glanced up, acknowledging the statement without surprise. "About the model," he added, as if clarifying something that did not need clarification. Clara gave a small nod. "It was not difficult," she replied. Ethan let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but softer. "You keep saying that," he said. "And every time, it sounds less believable." Clara tilted her head slightly. "That is because you are measuring difficulty by effort," she said, "not by clarity." Ethan absorbed that, the words settling deeper than expected. "And you measure it differently?" he asked. "I try to remove what does not belong," she answered. "What remains is usually simple." A pause followed. Not empty. Thoughtful. Ethan leaned slightly against the edge of the counter, not imposing, not dominating, just present. "Clara," he said, her name steady, deliberate. "People like you do not just end up here by accident." Clara's expression did not change, but her eyes held his a fraction longer this time. "And people like you do not usually notice," she replied. That landed. Quietly. Precisely. Ethan nodded once, accepting the truth. Without resistance. "Fair," he said. Another silence. Then, more directly, "So tell me, what are you doing here?" Clara did not answer immediately. She reached for a glass, polishing it slowly, giving herself a moment not to avoid the question, but to choose the answer. "Working," she said finally. Ethan shook his head slightly, a faint smile forming. "No," he said. "That is what you are doing. It is not why you are here." Clara stopped polishing the glass, set it down, looked at him fully. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade again, like it had earlier, leaving only the space between them. "Not everything needs to be explained," she said quietly. Ethan held her gaze, then nodded, slower this time. "No," he agreed. "But some things are worth understanding." Clara did not respond. Not with words. She simply held his gaze for a second longer, then looked away. And in that silence, Ethan realized something new. He was no longer trying to win the conversation. He was trying to earn it. The restaurant lights dimmed slightly as the evening shifted into its quieter hours, casting softer reflections across polished glass and dark wood. And for the first time since he had walked in, Ethan Caldwell was not thinking about the next deal, the next move, or the next outcome. He was watching someone who did not seem to be playing the same game at all. Clara moved behind the counter, finishing small tasks that no one else noticed, aligning receipts, wiping down surfaces, resetting what had already been set, as if order was something she restored, not maintained. There was no rush in her movements. No need to prove efficiency, just quiet precision. Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple business card, turning it once between his fingers before placing it gently on the counter in front of her. He did not slide it toward her. He did not push it forward. He simply left it there, like an option, not an offer. "If you ever decide that working is not enough," he said, his tone even, controlled, but without the sharp edge it once carried, "call me." Clara glanced at the card, but did not pick it up. Not yet. Her eyes traced the name, the title, the company printed in clean, confident letters. Then she looked back at him. And if I do not? She asked quietly. Ethan gave a slight nod, as if he had already considered that possibility. Then nothing changes, he said. Except that I will know I missed the opportunity. The honesty in that answer did not come with emphasis. It did not need to. Clara studied him for a moment, longer than before, as if measuring not his words, but the absence of ego behind them. Then she picked up the card, not carefully, not reverently, just simply, and turned it once in her hand before setting it back down in the same place. Not accepted, not rejected, just acknowledged. You assume I am looking for opportunity, she said. Ethan's expression remained calm. Everyone is, he replied. Clara shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in correction. No, she said softly. Some people are looking for alignment. The word lingered. Different from ambition. Different from success. Ethan did not respond immediately. He let the silence sit, not as a gap, but as space to think. Then, slowly he nodded. And you do not see that here? He asked. Clara's gaze moved briefly across the restaurant. The quiet tables, the soft conversations, the steady rhythm of a place that asked nothing more than presence. Then she looked back at him. I see exactly what this place is, she said. And that is why I am still here. Ethan followed her gaze for a second, seeing the room not as a setting, but as a choice. That was new. For him, places had always been tools, platforms, leverage. For her, they were something else. He exhaled quietly, then straightened, not to leave, but to shift. Then I will not try to convince you, he said. Clara gave a small nod, appreciating the restraint more than any argument. Good, she replied. Another silence followed, but it was no longer uncertain. It was understood. Across the room, his team began packing up, their work complete, their posture lighter now that the crisis had passed. One of them called out softly, "We are ready when you are, sir." Ethan did not turn right away. His eyes remained on Clara for a second longer. Then he reached for the card, hesitated, and instead of taking it back, he slid it just an inch closer to her. Not insistently, just slightly. It is not about leaving this place, he said quietly. It is about not limiting where you can go next. Clara did not touch the card. Not this time. She simply met his gaze, steady, unshaken. The right direction does not always look like an upgrade, she said. Ethan held that for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not because he disagreed, but because he understood more than he had before. He nodded once, then turned, walking back toward his team, his steps measured, his mind quieter than it had been all day. Behind him, the card remained on the counter, and Clara left it there. The door closed behind Ethan with a soft click that barely registered against the quiet hum of the restaurant, but the absence he left behind felt larger than the sound itself. His team followed, their voices fading into the night, their world already moving on to the next decision, the next number, the next negotiation. Inside, everything slowed again. The late evening settled in fully now, fewer tables occupied, softer conversations, longer pauses between movements. Clara remained behind the counter for a moment after they left, her hands resting lightly on the surface, her gaze drifting not toward the door, but toward the small rectangular card still lying where he had placed it. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she continued with her routine. She picked up a cloth, wiped down the counter in slow, even motions, aligned a stack of menus, adjusted a glass that was already perfectly placed. The card remained there, unmoved, unclaimed, but not ignored. A few minutes passed, then 10. The restaurant thinned further, chairs emptying, lights dimming slightly more as closing time approached. One of the other servers walked by, glancing briefly at the card before looking at Clara. "You going to take that?" she asked casually. Clara did not look up. "I already did," she said. The other server frowned slightly. "You did?" Clara nodded once, still focused on her task. "I just have not decided what it means yet." The server gave a small shrug and moved on, the question already forgotten. But for Clara, it stayed. When the last table left and the front door was locked, the restaurant shifted into its final rhythm of the night. Chairs were lifted onto tables. Floors were swept. The quiet became deeper, more complete. Clara finally reached for the card. Not quickly, not dramatically, just when the moment felt right. She held it between her fingers, turning it once, reading the name again. Ethan Caldwell. The title beneath it. The company. the world it represented. A world of urgency, of scale, of decisions that moved faster than most people could follow. She had seen that world before, not from the inside, but close enough to understand its weight. Her thumb brushed lightly across the edge of the card. Then she slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Not displayed, not discarded, just placed, as if it belonged there for now. Later, outside, the night air was cool, carrying the quiet hum of the city settling into its own rhythm. Clara stepped out onto the sidewalk, tying her jacket loosely around her, her posture relaxed but her mind still clear. Across the street, reflections of streetlights stretched across parked cars, long and steady. She walked a few steps, then stopped, not because she was unsure, but because she was thinking. Slowly, she reached into her pocket again and pulled out the card, looking at it under the soft glow of a street lamp. The same clean letters, the same quiet invitation. But now, without the noise of the restaurant, without the presence of Ethan, it felt different, simpler. She exhaled softly, her breath visible in the cool air, then slipped the card back into her pocket once more. Not with hesitation, with intention. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was already moving forward, already planning, already building on the outcome she had helped secure. But for Clara, the night remained still. And in that stillness, she did not feel behind. She did not feel less. She simply stood there for a moment longer, looking down the quiet street, knowing something had changed, not because someone offered her more, but because she had been reminded of what she already had. Then she turned and walked forward, not faster, not slower, just certain. The city did not rush that night, and neither did she. Clara walked a few blocks before the noise of the restaurant fully left her system, replaced by the quiet rhythm of footsteps on concrete and the distant hum of traffic fading into the background. There was no urgency in her pace, no sense of chasing something ahead or escaping something behind. Just movement. Steady. Intentional. She reached the corner where the streetlight flickered slightly, casting a soft, uneven glow across the sidewalk, and paused for a moment, not out of uncertainty, but out of awareness. The night felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer. She slipped her hand into her pocket again, her fingers brushing against the card without pulling it out this time. It was still there, unchanged, but it no longer felt like a question waiting to be answered. It felt like a reminder. Earlier that evening, a room full of people had been searching for intelligence in the wrong place. They had measured it in titles, in positions, in who was allowed to speak. And they had missed it, completely, until it chose to reveal itself. Clara exhaled slowly, her breath steady, her thoughts even steadier. She did not feel proud. She did not feel overlooked. She felt aligned. With herself. With the moment. With the quiet understanding that she did not need to be seen to be valuable, and she did not need to prove anything to be capable. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Caldwell would wake up the next morning with a deal secured, a problem solved, and a question that would not leave him easily. Not about numbers. Not about strategy. But about a moment where control had shifted without force, where clarity had come from someone he had almost dismissed. And that question would stay with him longer than the success itself. Clara, however, did not carry questions into the night. She carried decisions. Small ones. Quiet ones. The kind that did not announce themselves, but shaped everything that followed. She turned onto her street, the buildings more familiar now, the lights softer, the air still. At the entrance of her building, she stopped again, finally pulling the card out and looking at it one last time.